morning dispatch is out. See if I get any responses now. I'm actually asking if there's any cannons coming in. Let's see what happens now. Yankees will be arriving 1 o'clock. Okay. Make sure of time. Understand 10 a.m. coming down off of train. Break. Yes. 10 a.m. Thank you. By the way, where is our case of officer's whiskey? Did not show up on train last night. Break. We'll check and get back as soon as possible. No more traffic.
There were a few sharpshooters during the Civil War which made some fantastic shots from both sides at over 500 yards with the Sharps rifle. And what you did was that you'd pull this back out of the way and drop the lever that would expose the chamber. So you would slip your cartridge in from here, and when you snap the lever shut, it would cut the paper open, and that would expose the gunpowder. Then you'd slip your percussion cap over the nipple and go ahead and fire the gun. Single shot, okay? Favored the single shot. Pretty straightforward, no frill.
This, look at this. There's still a lot of silver left on here. See that? That's rare. I have a touch of silver on mine. And look at the back strap, see? Mm-hmm. And if you look at the originals, when they were first issued, the Colts, they would look just like this. Brass with heavy silver. Yeah. And the backing would be all shiny. It would be weird. But then within a short use of it, every time we touch it, we're removing the silver. You know that? Yeah. Now, I polished this up with silver. It was pretty shiny. I polished this gun up with silver. If you just, this is pretty good. I wouldn't do anything with it. If you use a little bit of silver polish, just one time, you're just taking off the tiniest layer of silver, and it will be shiny like that.
Okay, they're firing at me, and my friends are going down. Why don't I turn and run? And this is the real reason. Let's suppose, are you from the area? Santa Cruz, Felton?
Roseville.
Roseville.
Yeah.
Roseville has how many people in it?
About 90,000.
Okay, 90,000. Let's suppose it had 900. And all of the young men of unmarried age, 16 to 26, might have volunteered. So you maybe send 45 to 100 young men. They all wrote letters. They were all literate back then. And you don't want to send that back to somebody's fiance that says, Bob ran. You didn't run because your neighbor was right next to you. It's not like today where the guy next to you may be from Brooklyn and you're from California. The guy next to you was your fiance's brother. So the towns wouldn't collapse on each other. Now they might run and retreat all as a group. That was acceptable, but you didn't want to be a coward. It was better to be killed than be a coward.
Why did they stand? Why did they lay down?
Again,
Loading gun.
Again, unit cohesiveness. Oh. You want to get that firing, that shotgun effect. You really still needed to get it all combined. I need to hit, again, I don't hit very much. I mean, they had sharpshooters. They could have somebody could put 4 rounds through here. That was the entrance test for Verdans. I don't see anybody in green today for the Union, but we often have Verdans sharpshooters. They come out with a repeating rifle, which they had, and they would come out and by the end of the war, and they would basically be the sharpshooters. You send them out as skirmishers. Sharpshooters are picking people off.
Looks like tear that off and pour it down the barrel. And we don't draw our ramrods here because if we shoot them accidentally, they will kill someone. But normally what you do is pour it down with your mini ball and ram it. We have a percussion cap. Normally people measure, but I've just been eyeballing because it's too small a measure. Straighten it out.
First time I don't corner my eye, I'm like,
There's lots of different ways to close the ends. This is not the tidiest way, but it is the quickest. So it keeps everything sealed in there, and it doesn't take me half an hour to do.
This is a uniform that is similar in cut to the one that was worn by the captain of the 5th New York Volunteer Infantry, and that was a unit that was from Manhattan Island, New York. It is typical in that it features the Zouave trousers and the gaiters over the shoes, but what was unique to the captain of Company F is that he wore this particular Zouave jacket. He was the only captain of the 10 companies within the 1,000 men 5th New York Volunteer Infantry to wear such a jacket. Most of the other captains and officers preferred to wear the frock coat, which you can see examples of, and was the standard issue and standard one worn by other officers in the Civil War. The 5th New York Volunteer Infantry was from mostly Manhattan Island, New York, and the surrounding boroughs. They wore the distinctive uniform made famous by the French Zouaves, and that uniform traces its origins back to the indigenous Berber tribe Zouaoua, mercenary fighters who fought alongside the French in their battles and capture of Algiers. Ultimately, the country nearly had to destroy itself and tear itself in two to become one country and to go on to struggle with the things that remain unanswered today.
We belong to a group of gentlemen who belong to the 2nd Wisconsin, 6th Wisconsin, 7th Wisconsin, 19th Indiana, and eventually the 24th Michigan. We were the only all-Western brigade in the entire Army of the Potomac. We got a reputation early on in the war as a group of men that were a little rowdier because we were from the West. We were a little more ostentatious, I guess, with our uniforms. We used the regular Army uniforms. You notice the 1862 uniform, dark blue trousers, dark blue coat, regulation dress hat, and the leggings. Those are the hallmarks of the regular Army. And our general at the time was a regular Army general, and we had gone to Washington wearing gray uniforms, which were militia uniforms, which caused us problems at First Bull Run. So eventually, when this new general, General Gibbon, came in, General John Gibbon, promoted up from captain of the artillery, came in, he dressed us like a regular Army unit and gave us drill like a regular Army unit. And we became one of the best drilled units in the Army of the Potomac. We were also one of the hardest fighting units in the Army of the Potomac. The 2nd Wisconsin, for example, left Wisconsin with about 1,100 men, came back with 240 some odd men. It took the highest battlefield casualties of any Union unit in the war. Every unit has a personality. I mean, you go to different units here and they have different personalities. The Wisconsin unit that we portray has a specific personality. We tend to buck the system. If you read the books, the guys that we represent had the same attitude, the same way of doing things. So I don't know if we're carrying it on or whether it's just the method that or the reason that we're Western troops that we adopt these personalities. But nationwide, our sister units nationwide have the same personality. We're Western guys. We don't do Yankee very well, and we have a flair, or what we call hatitude, about us, because we wear these black hats. We're known as the black hats, or if you're a Southerner or a Southern persuasion, maybe those damned black hats.
And man, I started squalling and bawling and running out the stairs. Oh, okay.
Public are notified.
I watched the guy with the keyboard. I saw one on TV.
He had trouble because he photographed it.
Go forward with this gang. He says right here. Grab Eagle, put it over here.
Confederate States Marine Corps Company B.
So how this thing is loaded is you put
We
a
are
charge of powder,
both an infantry and artillery unit.
a charge of powder.
This is one of our infantry fellows behind you, and this is one of our
With the projectile.
seasoned sergeants explaining the details of shooting a cannon
All we're
to
going
some
to shoot
fresh
is
fish.
tinfoil. It's going to come out a little bit, fall on the
Anyway,
ground.
you were asking a question.
However,
What's this? This is what's called a
The
linstock.
pressure coming out of here on the flame.
Looks like a rope on a stick. It's just cotton rope soaked in
It's
potassium
deadly to about
nitrate.
here.
Then it burns
About 2.5
slow,
million
and
cuts out at this point.
and this is what we ignite. One source of to shoot the cannon with called a quill or
Beyond
straw
that, it's
fuse.
just going to roll you along the
A 3/4 scale Napoleon. That would have been a 12-pound on full scale. 3/4 scale is a 6-pound. Yeah, it's covered up in whatever. The implements we have. This is what's known as a sponge, a worm, and another implement with a sponge. And on the opposite end is a ramrod. The sequence would be, after it is shot, the worm would be placed down to remove the remnants of the bag that held the powder. Then a wet sponge, you dunk it in the water, run it down the bore. Then you run a dry sponge down the bore. Finally, you load the powder in. Then you'd ram it in. Then back at the back end of the gun, and I don't want to take it off. We can show you that one. It's uncovered now. And this isn't my gun, so I'm not going to mess with it. But back here is a hole called the vent, where the ignition source is placed. Like the quill fuse would go in the vent, and it would be lit with the linstock, and it would set off the main charge. And then a good crew could do that sequence, so load and fire about every 20 seconds. Let's go look at the other two. Most of them, at least in the early part of the war, were originally U.S. Marines, but they, like Lee, they went with their state of allegiance, went with their home state, and they formed the Confederate Marine Corps in approximately May 16th, I think it was, of 1861. This is a Coehorn mortar. Coehorn is like the brand name, like a Ford, Chevy, Maytag, whatever. Okay, mortar. Notice it's at about a 45-degree angle, whereas those guns shoot relatively horizontal. It would have been a 12-pound mortar with a 4.5-inch bore. It uses the same implements, only shorter, as the other guns did, but I can show you the vent on this one. This is the vent here. The ignition source called a quill or straw fuse. After the powder and ball or whatever you're shooting is loaded, then you use a brass pick, brass because it's non-sparking, puncture the powder bag, and put in the fuse and light it with the linstock. There's another linstock for your right hand there. This is what one of the fuses look like. Not exactly what they had back then, but these days it's it's Scotch tape rolled inside out around a small diameter tube, then rolled in fine black powder. It would sit in the hole, then touched with that, and it would flash and ignite the main charge. We also have friction primers. These are period correct. Museum, you might see the brass wire go through the top rather than down into it. It contained a small charge of fulminated mercury in powder with a wax plug. It would be placed in the vent. Then the lanyard would be attached to the wire, and then when this is pulled, it blows the flame down into the main charge, setting it off. There was the Treadgear Iron Works in Richmond, and I'm not sure where else cannons were made, but yeah, obviously it was a heavy industrial process. But yes, the 12-pound on the south shot the same ammo as a 12-pound on the north. Whether it was a howitzer like this one or a 12-pound Napoleon that would outweigh this by about 4 or 5 times. So there was some specialized guns, and I can show you that in a few minutes, that were rifled. Most of these were smoothbores. The rifle guns had to have basically their own bullets. So it wasn't a common ammo between like a 12-pounder howitzer to a howitzer to mortar to Napoleon would take all the same ammo. Solid shot, say this one would be half a mile. That would be against other artillery or troops in formation. And then there was what we call shells nowadays. They were literally a hollow shell that had a time delay fuse that would be set off by the main charge. You wouldn't shoot one. You might shoot one of those out of these, definitely out of the howitzer. So then it would explode downrange over the troops. Then more out of the horizontal guns were grape shot. The Navy developed to take out the rigging on ships. Those were also great. I say great, but they did massive damage against other artillery. And like grape shot is a stack of 3 sets of 3 balls, and the black stuff on my hand is what we affectionately known as cannon snot. But the 3 sets of 3 balls are stacked together with a plate and a couple of rings and a bolt. When it's fired, the bolt breaks and the 9 balls are what we're worried about going down range. And one of those would go through at a horse at a quarter mile. Close in range anti-personnel is called canister shot. It's basically a coffee can full of musket balls. It would turn one of these into a sawed-off shotgun. So you can imagine about 140 muskets going off at once against, people 50 yards away. It would take out quite a crowd. This is called a Whitworth. It is uncommon to see, number one, it's rifled and it's breech loading. Most of the rest of them are smooth bore and muzzle loading. One great benefit with this is you could stay behind all the structure here to load and clean and reload the gun, whereas almost all of the action to load the gun on the smooth muzzle loaders are in the front. It's backwards from loading that. On that you load the powder first, then the projectile. Here you load the projectile, then the powder, and then this is swung shut. Like I said, this is on, so I don't want to mess with it too much. Anyway, it was the spin on there, and then the primer would go in the back here, whereas you see a vent hole on those guys, it's like a hole right here where the ignition source goes. Alrighty?
Thank you. These are the rifle boxes. These are how they would have been shipped from the armories. These two came from London, and they would have been carrying 58 caliber Infields, 12 per box. And they should have the weight down here, like this one has, 164 pounds. The Springfields from Springfield Armory would have been coming 20 rifles per box, and they're also the 58 caliber.
It's great fun, very, very educational.
Yeah.
20th Maine had fought in Fredericksburg and Gettysburg. We started out with 1,000 men, but by the time we got to Gettysburg in 1863, we had very few troops left because we had gotten slaughtered in Fredericksburg. We were most famous for like a really big bayonet charge on Little Round Top.
We held the end of the Union line on Little Round Top at Gettysburg. And so that was definitely the 20th Maine's most important moment in the war. I just think that people need to still remember the history of the Civil War, and it's just it was probably the most important time in United States history, and so we're just trying to keep it in people's minds as being an important time. One of the things we can learn is that everybody has their differences, different politics, and different ways of thinking, but we need to stay together as a country because when you let things get too out of control, then things like the Civil War are what can happen from it.
Okay, I'm a washerwoman for the 20th Maine, and I use the bottles here for different types of cleaning. Fuller earth is used to clean wools or heavy canvases or things like that you can't physically wash. Borax is used to soften and whiten clothes or brighten them. Spirit of wine is used to do spot removal on lighter material like shirts so that you don't have to wash them as often. And bluing balls is what kept those white shirts looking white, because lye soap will cause them to start turning yellow after a while. So a rinse with some bluing will return them to a white appearance. Lye soap was usually made by the person themselves. It takes a lot of time and effort because you have to gather the ash from a wood fire and filter it through a straw beds and collect the remnants and take the lye water and then heat it and mix it with lard, lots of clean lard, and you mix them together, boil them together, and if they didn't blow up, you could spread it out on large pans and let it dry, and it become cakes. And you could break them up into the pieces, sizes that you wanted. The washerwomen, if they were hired by the company, they were allowed to follow the troops behind, and the company actually provided a wagon for them and 1 meal's worth of rations to use, and they were also then paid 50 cents per month per soldier that they washed for.
This is a Sibley. When he was a captain in the Army before the Civil War in the frontier, saw the Comanche teepees that they had there and thought of this design. It's a center pole, just one pole, whereas the Comanche has several poles. This became very popular in the beginning of the Civil War, although at the time he became a major. He decided to go on to the Confederate side. The Union had offered him $5 for every tent that they produced, but unfortunately because he became a Confederate, he didn't get a dime, and they produced over 300,000 of these tents.
We trained the Sisters of the Holy Cross, and they were a teaching order that taught out of St. Mary's the Lake across from Notre Dame. They were the girls' school, and beginning of the Civil War, the sisters were asked to come into the hospitals and run the hospitals because there weren't any nurses or administrators that could step into those positions. And the sisters were the first United States Navy nurses. General Grant had captured a Confederate riverboat, the Red Rover. They converted it into a hospital ship, and the sisters worked on the riverboat for 4 years, taking the wounded up the Mississippi to Cairo, Illinois, and bringing back down food, supplies, troops, and ice. The sisters were referred to by the troops as the Sunshine Sisters.
He had to do all his finals, all his projects early because drill was the last 3 weeks of the college.
How you doing, boss?
How you doing?
All right, I need to upgrade. I'll just do it at 25.
And whenever any of our men leave camp to go to civilian town or to go to the Confederate camp, they must have a pass issued by provost. Maintain order in the camps as well as in the towns that we occupy. We also follow behind the marching column, shoot deserters, pick up stragglers, shirkers. If they fall out to go to the restroom and it takes too long, they're deserting and they're shot. We also organize intelligence gathering, try to find out the enemy's position, as well as how many men they have, how many cavalry they have, how many cannons they have. Right now, what I'm doing is making sure that no Confederates come in our camp, making sure the men are not drinking or gambling in our camp, make sure there's no contraband of any kind in our camp. And if a fight breaks out, they all get arrested, put in the ball and chain and various different shackles.
Now this one here from Salinas, I guess they didn't do much for
With the 6 eggs, save them in